think it's important not to set huge targets or goals that you know they're never going to reach. I think if you start off with a very, very small achievement and they reach that and you give very positive feedback and they can see that you're genuinely pleased for them, and it's easier then to increase your expectations with that child. And I think also presenting lessons and work in a finding out what makes them tick, what they're interested in, what how they like to learn, and presenting it in that way might encourage them to come into the learning circle a bit more as well.
A really good example. There was there was a boy in the class I was in, and he was on a behaviour report for really poor behaviour, like in every lesson, really challenging behaviour. And they found out something he was really interested in. He loved doing art and just drawing. And he had this behaviour chart, and he got points how well he behaved in each lesson, and if he got a certain amount of points in a day, then he was given, I think it was about 10-15 minutes to just do some art, and that was his reward for life. So he knew that if he got so many points, his behaviour was so good, then that he was going to be able to do something that he liked. So that kind of helped his behaviour.
It's really visual as well, because he can see them.
And he carried it around, like, because they moved lessons because they were set, so he carried around with him each day. And then like at a certain point in the day, the teacher would call him over and like talk through his points, like, oh, why did you get this and this? And so it was a good visual way, and then it was also talked through, and then he got his reward and it was something that he was really interested in as well. Like he got to choose what he did. They were like, what are you interested in? He said, oh, I like drawing, doing some art. They said, well, that can be your reward. You can have so many minutes a day doing that if you get.
Finding out the interests, I think, is key, isn't it? Find out what they like, and then.
We had quite a visual way when I was at school. In another school, there was 3 or 4 boys in one class that always played up, and we had they had individual racetrack like worksheets, and they put them on the board, and they moved their car from the start to the end, and they usually got to the end by the end of the week, and it was you'd move one space if you behaved well in a lesson, or if you did something that was seen like as kind and well behaved, and they really liked it. It was also it got quite competitive as well, because they wanted to get to the end, so they were like, oh, where are you? And that really motivated them, really.
Was that group, that small
It started off with just the 4 boys, and then it went to the whole class.
I was going to say, because I can imagine being in a class and seeing that going on, I'd almost want to be a part of that, and I'd almost maybe play up just so I could get a car and join the race.
It started off just with these particular children, and then went to the whole class, and they had they were on a different wall depending on what house they were in, and they had their name by the racetrack.
Yeah, I like that idea. That's quite good.
Do you ever think about with those sort of misbehaving children, is whether they are being challenged enough in a classroom? Sometimes it is just boredom that makes children play up. And
absolutely. There was a child in my class from my last placement, and his behaviour, although he hadn't been screened for it and it hadn't been proven, he demonstrated all the behaviour of a child with ADHD, and he just couldn't follow a great number of tasks. He needed small tasks and given to him one after the other after he was accomplishing them, and he would regularly, if you were talking, just start talking or just have an outburst with something, and quite often it wasn't because he was being disruptive or misbehaving, it was just his way of maybe communicating. Absolutely. And the thing is, he might have looked from where I was standing as though he was somewhere else completely, like he wasn't listening, but yet he was able to verbalise and answer any question. He was always listening, and the way that and it didn't matter how many times I warned him or asked him in a negative way, and I found that the best way of keeping him on track was to positively involve him in my conversation. So rather than giving an example I was talking about droplets of water dispersing into a material in science, and I noticed he was becoming restless, so I had his table stand up and become the droplets of water, and I showed the rest of the class them moving around. So I found that by involving him maybe in a practical demonstration, or even just by saying, so if I walked past and used the child's name, he would suddenly look at me and then I had his attention for a couple more minutes just because I'd used his name. And sometimes just by having the positive reinforcement, they feel like they're special and as though they're being involved a bit more.
Yeah, using the name is really good as well, than like in English with sentences and so on. If you're doing some really boring bits of grammar, having the children's names in the sentences. Really
I think for some children, it's like so difficult to sit in a classroom and to conform to being in a classroom, and I think it's important to look for. They've all got that special little thing that they are good at, whether it's coming in and hanging their coat up, or there's just something that you can pull out that you can, whereby they might not get a point for any of their work or anything, that you could just say, you know, that's your star for today, well done. So they can feel that they are, because other children will think, why are they getting stars for their work or their behaviour if it isn't what's expected of another child? So if it's something that a child can recognise as being good as well, then they won't become resentful towards each other, because children very quickly can become like, well, why is he getting a marble or a star or something when I haven't, and I feel I've worked really well all day, and then that'll affect their behaviour. I just think sometimes we can just pull a tiny, hopefully, thread from them.
One technique I saw a teacher use was, there was one child who would constantly play up during group sessions on the carpet. So what she did was she got the circle time teddy and she had him sat in her chair, and he was responsible for making sure the rest of the class behaved, because he had this teddy and he sat in the chair. And at first I thought perhaps he won't be concentrating on the lesson as much because he'll be concentrating on the class, but in fact because he felt important, he was concentrating fully on the lesson and wasn't really paying that much attention to the class, but it's just he needed that sort of important role to make him feel involved and included.
Sorry, go on.
Sometimes, like what you were saying about using the names and like positive, because some children who have like behaviour problems are used to being told off, or like negative language, and the name's always being used like because they're being told off. Like trying to use positive language or using the name and getting them involved in things that probably make a difference. I'm just like
just hearing it in a negative way, they can associate their name with being positive.
I experimented with something by giving them job descriptions within the role, so I had 2 researchers, 2 presenters and an observer, and by having the observer, their role was to see how their group was working well as a team. So although they were looking for, you know, good communication skills, listening, taking it in turn to talk, you know, all these sort of positive qualities, they obviously still listening to everything that was going on, and they were still taking in the information. And by giving that important role to the individuals that were perhaps more prone to disruptive behaviour, it actually had a really good impact. And apart from 1 or 2 groups where I think it was maybe just one of those days when they just weren't in that frame of mind, it was generally a really good and positive strategy.
What lesson did you do that? I really like that idea. What lesson was that?
That was in a science lesson, and we were researching.
I did that in literacy as well.
So you can pull it across the different.
Oh, absolutely. we were researching all the scientists, you know, through history, Fleming, Jenner, and basically the idea was that they were seeing how we're using like laptops and workbooks, trying to answer a number of questions, and each group was researching a different scientist, and by having the roles, they were watching how the others were working within the group. But like I say, it's something that you can, you know, even if it's a maths investigation, you could implement that.
I like the way that you give a role to one of them to say, how well are you all working as a team? Can you write down what makes you good? Because that makes them accountable for their work. And it, like you say, it gives that child a role as well. I really like that. And to make them notice what they're doing as a team there.
And to see it in practical application as well. Like with a new class, before I do set them off for group work, I would usually, you know, discuss expectations when you're in a group, and they always have their hands up, and they always say, oh yeah, everyone should get a turn to talk, and we've got to listen to everyone else in the group, and they just don't do it when they go off in the group. You obviously know you're just not doing it, so seeing it